U.S. Senator Ron Wyden. I'm Skip Newberry, President and CEO of TAO. And a couple of rules of engagement before we start. All participants have been muted. Please remain on mute unless a TAO staff member unmutes you and calls on you to talk. You may ask questions in the chat box publicly or privately by directing your message to Justin Martinez or to Kara Snow. We'll ask you all to engage by the participant icon on your screen, and we'll continue to monitor the chat box and respond throughout the discussion. We encourage you to engage with us on social media. If you do any screenshots of myself and the Senator and share those via social, we'll definitely do a reshare. Highly encourage those. Also wanted to mention that due to the large number of participants and the limited time, we'll capture all questions in the chat and shift any unanswered questions to our online member engagement platform, which is called Mobilize. So that's where we're going to keep the conversation going after the event. If you have any questions about joining Mobilize, please reach out to Justin, whose email is on the screen. And if you have any questions about joining TAO, please reach out to membership@techoregon.org. TAO staff support is provided today by Kara and Justin, who are happy to take feedback, questions, comments, or discuss sponsorship opportunities. A huge thank you to Packstar and their CEO, Peggy Miller, for all their support in underwriting the series. And please join us on Thursday, May 21st for our next session with SAFE as we explore the framework and guidelines for returning to work while navigating the pandemic. It's now my pleasure to introduce U.S. Senator Ron Wyden. Senator Wyden has served Oregonians at the federal level since 1996. He's a ranking member of the Senate Finance Committee and past chair of both the Senate Finance Committee and the Senate Energy Committees. Senator Wyden previously served 15 years in the U.S. House of Representatives from Oregon's 3rd District. As you all know, he has been a huge supporter of the tech industry, both in Oregon and more broadly. So thank you, Senator, for joining us today.
Thank you, and thank you for that inflationary introduction. I'm going to keep this brief in terms of my remarks. When I became Oregon's first new senator, essentially in 34 years, I said, we have always in our state been about wood products. And I am going to work my head off to help those rural communities and resource-dependent communities to get those family wage jobs in the days ahead. I also said that I am going to do everything I can to get us in here, and I made that judgment when, as I say, I was Oregon's first new United States senator in more than 30 years, that Oregon had extraordinary opportunities for entrepreneurship in the technology sector. And when I showed up in the Senate, basically nobody but Senator Pat Leahy knew how to use a computer. And I said, this is natural for us. And I had to write some of the kind of ground floor rules with respect to the internet. I wrote the law that ensured if you had a website or a blog, you wouldn't be held personally liable for what was posted on your site. I wrote the law that ensured that tech companies wouldn't be subject to multiple and discriminatory taxes when they did business online. I wrote the digital signature law. And my kind of lodestar, because I didn't then nor now pretend to know everything about the internet, was to talk to a lot of people and say, what is this really going to mean for the private economy? For example, with respect to that first law, which many say was the law that created the social media, that you wouldn't have had these tremendous companies if you would have been held, personally liable for making an investment, one of them at the beginning. I said, I don't know everything about technology, but I said, nobody is going to put up $25 to invest in something if they think they're going to be personally on the hook for everything that happens and is out of their control. So this has been a tremendous, honor. I've tried to keep building on it. You win some, sometimes you lose. 2 days ago, we had just a particularly frustrating experience on the floor of the United States Senate. I got 59 votes for an amendment that would limit warrantless spying on Americans who are at home right now. We've got, of course, millions of Americans in the middle of a pandemic doing tech work, helping kids with homework, looking up prescription drug prices for an older parent. And I don't think law-abiding Oregonians or Americans should have their government snooping on them. And we got 59 votes in the Senate. We needed 60. We lost by just one. There were some senators absent, so we're going to come back. But this is all about kind of finding fresh policies for the times. I'm pleased that both Democrats and Republicans have supported my bedrock idea in the early legislation, the employee retention tax credit, which creates incentives for employers, tech and others, to retain workers. And of course, then you don't have folks needing to visit unemployment because they're keeping their jobs in the private sector. So all of you have proven that technology companies can grow in really every nook and cranny in the States, not just in the metro area. And so we're really proud of what you do and this relationship. And with that, I think I'll just turn it over to all of you for questions. And let's just make sure, could everybody hear most of that?
Yes, for sure. The audio came through very well. And I think that was a great introduction to all the work you've done to date, as well as some of the more recent stuff that you've been focused on as it relates to the federal stimulus efforts and federal relief packages. And, you know, one question that came up from some of our members that they're interested in is, you know, in terms of the COVID-19 sort of relief efforts and the ways in which we're actually addressing the virus itself, both with contact tracing and the like, there's obviously a lot of power in the technology that can be used, but then there's also, of course, real concerns around data privacy. And, you know, you've been continuing to keep data privacy front and center for folks, you know, case in point to what you were just talking about in terms of some recent federal legislation you were, you know, a proponent of. So how do you strike that right balance between the need on the one hand to make sure that we're leveraging the full power of technology, but also that we're not breaching data privacy rights in this crisis we find ourselves?
We could spend the rest of Friday and into the weekend talking about that. And that was part of what I was dealing with on the floor of the Senate, is that I think it is dead wrong to pit liberty against the economy and security and the like, because to me, on issues like the economy and liberty, smart policies give you more of both. Not so smart policies don't give you much of either. It's one of the reasons, for example, why I've been very strongly against weakening strong encryption. I think that would hurt privacy and it would hurt the economy if we, for example, have Bill Barr say that he's going to require companies to build backdoors into their products, and basically that's an invitation to leave the United States. So I really appreciate the question. And let me talk a little bit about striking the right balance, particularly in the context against COVID-19. So it's very fitting that our companies are at the forefront of this debate. They're creating amazing products, and it's a chance to do well economically and to help people. And as I pointed out 2 days ago on the floor of the Senate, got 59, votes, really a very strong, showing. What we did in that bill was to strike the balance. Yes, we were protecting people's privacy, but I also feel very strongly, and I actually wrote it, about the emergency provision that says, for example, if there was a bomb outside Salem, the government is in a position to get the information it needs immediately in order to protect the people of our state, and then comes back after we've protected the community and settles up later with respect to the warrants. So these issues show a kind of long-running kind of challenge. Apropos of the contact tracing issue, as we know, Google and Apple have announced plans to roll out Bluetooth-based contact tracing tech. I mean, it's obviously a sincere effort, and the two companies are working hard to ensure transparency about the technology. So it's not trying to do this, just behind closed doors. Nobody can know anything about what they're up to in terms of contact tracing technology. I will tell you that I'm still skeptical about the prospect that Bluetooth-based contact tracing can be a viable way to trace or contain the coronavirus anytime soon, given the big gaps in testing and the high participation rate that you need for success and the unknown accuracy of Bluetooth technology. So obviously there's more work to do, and this is what I, as an elected official, need to be working on, is trying to decide hard questions about how information is collected and shared and whether participating is going to be required. Now, I will tell you, and I think people know that I'm an ideas-driven individual. I'm not looking to just say this person's bad and this person's good, but there is no indication that any federal agency right now is prepared to take responsibility for answering the questions that I talked about. And without a coordinated federal response to the pandemic, more information about immunity and vast test increases in testing capacity, I'm not convinced that smartphone apps are going to be able to move the needle that much. I'm willing to work closely. I mean, the unemployment benefits, the system really hadn't changed since the 1930s. Nobody ever heard about a gig worker in the 1930s. And a lot of these employment systems were from the dark ages. Some of them were using COBOL programming. And at one point, one of the debates, somebody said, hey, Ron, you're a tech guy. What about this COBOL program? How old is it? Is it like 20, 30 years old? And I said, how about 60? So we're playing catch-up ball in some of these areas. And the idea is to try to find a way to bring people together. And as I say, 2 days ago was very frustrating because we worked the floor very hard. My amendment was bipartisan. You get 59 votes, and you got to get one more. And now we're trying to see if we can get it in the House bill. But it reflects what a different time this is, because you have millions of people sitting at home. They are home because of government policies that instructed them to be at home. That's what shelter at home is all about. But we're going to also need to figure out how to make sure that as we do that we strike balances on these issues, not just have government peering over people's shoulders from the time to get up in the morning until the time to go to bed.
That's a great response. One sort of related question we're getting from folks is mainly around where we go next with the federal stimulus efforts, and we're getting some questions about in terms of funding for startups and minority and women-owned businesses. You've obviously been a big proponent of trying to make sure that it's possible for those types of companies to get access to federal relief and funding. So what would you say is kind of the most needed thing that the federal government needs to focus on in terms of future federal stimulus funding or relief at this point as it relates to those companies?
Let me tell you what I'm hearing, and we have Zoom conferences kind of all day long. I had the state's first ever virtual town hall meeting. I think must have been 10 days or so ago. And what I have really sensed is that this collection of programs driven by the SBA, the Small Business Administration, and Treasury have certainly helped some people, but they really haven't gotten dollars to the smallest of the small companies. And a lot of them just have short-term liquidity kinds of issues. They're trying to figure out how to keep the lights, on and, pay for servers and all kinds of things. I mean, they're just really having big challenges. And if they're not in tech, for example, we've got a huge, growth in your industry in terms of beer. You got people, in breweries are trying to replace stale beer. So what I'm really going to focus on in this next package is trying to make sure small businesses get an influx of cash so that they have the chance to survive. And these are businesses that don't necessarily want to take on more debt through PPP. And this could, I think, also bring in the credit unions, the small lenders, and others who, particularly in the most recent coronavirus package, what's called package 3.5, what we ought to be doing is building on the existing programs. And I really want to make sure that with a cash influx, so they can deal with short-term liquidity, improving and growing the employee retention tax credit that I wrote in the CARES Act, and giving more flexibility to the PPP program and a broader length of time for people to look at options using it. Those three things, I think, really get us moving in the best direction going forward.
Great. And following on that, in terms of some of the talk around federal infrastructure spending, what do you see as the prospects of an effort there, and what might that look like for Oregon?
Well, I'm very hopeful that we can finally put together an infrastructure package. I think there are proven models of public-private partnerships. In 2009, when I was a new member of the Finance Committee, I developed the Build America Bonds program. And the federal government had never bonded, before. And I have all these members with lots of seniority, and they look down, they see this basketball playing guy from Oregon, and they say, well, what do you think is going to happen? I said, well, I've been talking to investment houses, and they tell me we might get $4 or $5 billion worth of private investment in Build America bonds over the next year and a half. Public-private investment. And everybody said, my God, $4 to $5 billion, that's terrific, let's pass it. So we passed it, and we generated $183 billion worth of Build America bonds in a year and a half. In fact, if you came, or traditionally, if you came to work up 26, a lot of that road is a lot less congested, and you can get through traffic in some spots because of the Build America Bonds program. So I want to see us invest in infrastructure, and the Trump administration has unfortunately been passing up opportunities. And when they came in early in 2017, Orrin Hatch, then the chairman of the committee, and myself said, we've got the support of all the D's and the R's to use some of the repatriated money in a tax bill, money that comes from overseas, for infrastructure. And the president said, yes, you're great. And then there was no follow-up. And I suspect now, particularly because the president is looking at going forward in the summer and the fall, because I heard a rumor there was an election, I think maybe we can get some support for it. But I strongly support federal infrastructure, and not just roads and bridges and transportation systems, but broadband and the energy grid and kind of infrastructure writ large.
Excellent. In terms of financial reporting requirements, this is a question from one of our members. Are there any financial reporting requirements for spending federal money, and can we use this as an opportunity to improve the lives of Oregonians?
I want to make sure I understand the conversation. The reporting issues with respect to new money coronavirus packages, of course, is a combination of accountability and what I call workability, because we saw some of the early efforts with PPP meant that Ruth Chris Steakhouses and the like were getting money, and kind of little businesses in Oregon and the like were trying to, get through on on the phone. So I'm not sure that the questioner was asking about a specific program, but for me, reporting issues are always a balance between accountability, so that you don't have a program that's supposed to be for small business and Ruth Chris ends up getting a big chunk of the money early on, and making it workable. Because if you put small businesses through, bureaucratic water torture, that's another hoop and another expense that is going to make it hard for their concern to be viable.
Well said. Well said. Another question we got related to, it looks like an executive order. It looks like there's talk about an executive order preventing drones being purchased from foreign countries. However, one of the reasons the U.S. fell into last place in this market was due to overregulation and legislative fear of new drone tech. Like the internet example, can we change things to allow for U.S. innovation in tech?
Well, as it happens, I have been one of the ringleaders in public life in promoting UAVs and the companies in Oregon and nationally. And people are kind of surprised about that early on, because they said, Ron, you're a privacy hawk. You're one of the leaders in terms of getting sensible privacy policies. Come again? Why are you a big supporter of UAVs? And I said, this really illustrates the issue, and it's kind of right at the heart of what TAO has always been about. Nobody who's thinking thoughtfully would say that the answer is to freeze promising technology. That seems illogical even by Washington, D.C. standards. What you want to do is not freeze technological innovation. You want to make sure that you're encouraging responsible uses of the technology, not freezing technology innovation, but encouraging responsible uses of the technology. And so I have been a big supporter of mountaintop rescue, because if you can get a drone up there and rescue somebody in a rural area, nobody's going to say there's a privacy violation. I've been a big supporter of the use of UAVs in terms of precision agriculture, which is very important in the rural parts of the state where I always go and have town meetings. And it's hugely important in terms of fighting fire, because you can get those small drones in on the ground and get information, in effect, back to a traditional office, and they can make judgments that are better suited to real-time conditions. So I am very supportive of UAVs. I think the question touched on the kind of global picture. I think if we're talking about tax incentives, and I made some comments on this today in the context of a different issue, I would like to make sure all the possible tax incentives can be, in effect, structured to give the biggest advantage to doing business in the United States. I mean, I've always felt the trade is not a zero-sum game. It's not one job here and another job somewhere else. It might be 2 jobs here and 3 jobs somewhere else, and then the next day the order is reversed. But I do feel that not only should we be promoting UAVs for the reasons that I just described, I think we ought to look at this as potentially another opportunity for us to export. 1 out of 4 jobs in Oregon depends on trade and exports. The export jobs often pay better than do the non-trade jobs. So I just came off being the Democrat who dug in and put together the bipartisan agreement in the Senate for what was kind of the redo of NAFTA. And I'm a very strong supporter of, in effect, growing it, building it in Oregon, shipping it all over the world, because the world loves buying Oregon.
Excellent. So it looks like we have time for maybe one more quick question. And one thing that came up, this is a big one, was urban-rural issues around internet access and connectivity. Do you have maybe a couple of quick remarks on sort of where you see federal efforts going now as it relates to the digital divide?
Yeah, I can tell the participants I'm trying to make sure that in each one of these coronavirus packages, there is the most targeted, generous funding for filling, the gaps in the urban-rural divide as it relates to technology. It might be distance learning. It might be in terms of telehealth. We've learned a lot about kind of trying to create focal points, and that makes a lot more sense than telling kids they got to go to a local supermarket or a library parking lot and try to do their homework in the cold. There have been some programs that I thought made a lot of sense. The Reconnect program is a good example of it. I guess the Trump people don't like it because the Obama people thought it up, and that's kind of a perfect example of what we ought to try to avoid. Let's be for good ideas and then give credit to everybody in sight rather than creating, some kind of idea, well, that's a Democratic program, and so we're not gonna do it. But I can tell you, after 970 town hall meetings, we get in the car and we start, driving to rural Oregon. There are a lot of folks that are falling between the cracks, that are right in the center of that, digital divide, where in Portland and the Valley, you have access to what I call a technology treasure trove, an amazing set of services and speeds and the like. And, in a lot of rural areas, you're not getting much of a signal at all. So in each of these packages, I've been trying to target more dollars there. And nobody had ever made a commitment in public service in Oregon before to have open meetings in every county each year. I've had 970 of these in-person meetings, and I'm just really going to do everything I can to get us to the other side on this virus, because I want to get back to those town meetings. That's how I learned so much listening to Oregonians. So if this is the last question, I got a lengthy closing address of about 1.5 minutes, and that is, I've so enjoyed my relationship with TAO and with our companies. As I say, when I became Oregon's first new senator in 34 years, and I was the first senator, if you need some history, I was the first senator ever elected by mail. Gordon Smith, a Republican, was the second senator elected by mail. I really vowed that I was going to try to bring people together around fresh, innovative ideas. And right up at the top of my list would be technology. And I think those early laws that I wrote have paid off. I keep seeing Mike Rogaway stories in the O about how technology employment is consistently ahead of other sectors in our state. Wages have grown faster in tech than in other sectors. And I like to think what I've been part of has helped to contribute to that. And I know TAO has really taken the lead. And so I've really enjoyed this relationship. And I guess everybody's got to wrap up the call now, but I'd like to put this talk in the to be continued department. Would that be acceptable to the organizers?
That sounds fantastic. And we appreciate the relationship too, and also taking some time out of your incredibly busy schedule to spend it with us this morning. So we appreciate it.
Well, take good care, everybody. Be safe, and we'll look forward to doing this in person before long as well. Bye now.
Sounds great. Thank you. And thank you to all of you for joining us today, as well as to Packstar and Peggy Miller for all their support. So we'll take additional questions that we didn't get a chance to answer, and we'll put those in Mobilize, and the Wyden team will be able to weigh in on those. So we'll get those to you in about a week or so. Again, thank you, everyone, and have a great weekend.